Hey there, Groovesters. Ridgely here with another Groove Growth program, and I am super excited to welcome Erin, Hinson, and Kristen Donnelly from the Abbey Research Group, which is part of Abbey Companies, which is a multinational that focuses on something that I think is super interesting, which is empathy education and how being empathetic and growing your empathy is particularly good for your business. So I'm really loving this because A, it makes people better people, and it's good for your business. So we're going to dive right in and talk to us a little bit about who wants to jump in first. Kristen, you want to start first? Tell us a little bit about what is empathy education and why is it that empathy is so good for business?
Well, what's good for business is treating people like people so they stay in your organization and you don't have excessive turnover. You're not spending time putting out personnel fires. You are doing the work of your business. Mm-hmm. And empathy is one of the ways to get there. So what empathy is a mindset. Even though we often associate it with emotions, we think it's something some people are born with and some people aren't. That's actually not quite true. It's gotten a bit of a bad rap in that way. Instead, in our research, what we have discovered and implemented and taught for so long has been that empathy is a mindset where you intentionally choose to understand someone instead of resting on all of your assumptions about them.
So is that a co-creative process? In other words, when you're having a dialogue or encountering someone, is that happens live in the moment through your intention, or what does that look like?
Go ahead.
It can happen as a co-creative process, but it's also something that you can build and grow through your own self process. And so we really talk about empathy both as, seeking to understand more about yourself and more about others. But you don't have to necessarily understand more about others in conversation with other people. And so our framework of empathy is, and especially the education part, is you can take a lot of that education on yourself. You can watch a documentary about a group that you've never heard of or a religion that you know nothing about. You can listen to a podcast episode or watch a YouTube video or, find an interview series on Netflix and engage with difference in a way that broadens your understanding and maybe dispels some of those assumptions that you would previously make about those, whatever category of person you're looking at.
Because empathy isn't about agreeing with somebody. It's simply about understanding their worldview, their perspective, and the source of their decisions.
Now, how does that play in with the concept of mentorship? Like, for example, the idea that the disciple chooses the mentor, so to speak. And I have mentors that are not alive today anymore. And they're my mentors because I chose them, because I said, wow, what this person is teaching and espousing resonates with me on a core level. And therefore, I want to tap into that. How does this kind of relate to or blend in with the mentorship and that adoption of a mentor process, even if you don't know the person?
It's a fascinating question. And I love it because it trucks something in my mind. We teach emotional intelligence through using the metaphor of a trampoline that I've developed over a long time. And the bouncy bit of the trampoline is where you invite mentors and other thinking partners in to kind of help you test out what you think about the world. The springs are kind of what you think about the world, what you think about yourself, how you move through your empathetic mindset in a way. And you invite these other people, living, dead, known to you or not, to bounce along with you, either for a long time or a short period of time. And so one of our chief bouncing partners at Abbey Research, we say all the time, is Brene Brown, because Dr. Brown's work on vulnerability is so formative to our understandings of humanity, It's a core text in the internship program that we run and what we kind of do. But like one of my personal ones is C.S. Lewis, and how he specifically saw the power of stories and myth. G.K. Chesterton, the power of story to help people move. I've been reading their work and bouncing with them for a long part of my life, and they were dead long before I shuffled onto this mortal coil. So I would say that, in the formal mentor relationship, also I should say, and I'm sure you agree with Ridgely, like there's lots of different kinds of mentors, and we have different mentors in different seasons, and we have different relationships with people. But like a formalized mentor relationship, I would say is a lot about asking questions back to you. It's somebody that you can ask questions of, and they can ask you questions. And since curiosity and question asking are at the core of empathy, I think mentoring can only serve to deepen your empathetic practice.
What do you say, Erin, or where does somebody start? If they're one of these people, it's kind of like this. I just don't buy all that stuff. What do you do with that person, Erin?
Oh, we get those people all the time. I love that question. It's one of the reasons why literally almost every time we teach empathy, we do some myth busting first, to explain what the cultural perceptions are of empathy and how we think about it differently. Because we do get a lot of people like that say, I've never been good with emotions or like reading people. I don't do that, emotional fluffy stuff. That's not going to help me in my business. And it's a way that people shut off from having to do that work, even before they understand maybe what it means. And so we've tried to expand it beyond that idea of having some sort of emotional capacity or emotional sensitivity, if you will, being able to sense other people's emotional states. When we teach about it all the time, we find that one of the more damaging phrases that is ever used is "I know how you feel." And so we do a lot of teaching around kind of understanding that empathy isn't about knowing what another person is feeling or feeling the same as them. The example Kristen and I use all the time when we talk about this is that we lost our grandmothers several years ago, right around the same time. And we had been friends for probably 5 or 6 years at that point. And if she had looked at me and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry that your grandma died. I know exactly how you feel," I would have called her a liar. Because we had very different family relationships, familial structures. We had very different relationships with our grandparents. We have different processes of how we grieve and handle death, and think about a lot of those things. And so for us, it was more like asking questions and being curious about what's going on. How are you feeling about this? How can I support you?
What do you need from me?
Yeah. And so we do a lot of that. But it does seem to answer the bigger part of your question. What do we do when people come to us and say, I don't know where to start? I don't like this. It doesn't sound right for me. And we get a lot that it sounds like too big an ask. Like, understanding humans better. Like, I don't have time for that. I run a business. I have 2 jobs and 3 kids, and soccer games to run my kiddos around to. I don't have time to do that. But we try and break it down pragmatically into the intentional choice every day to try and understand someone better. And it doesn't have to be, Mahatma Gandhi and a better understanding of Buddhism or, learning more about experiences of humans who live in Afghanistan. It could be about trying to understand yourself a little bit better, or understand your partner a little bit better, or your coworker a little bit better. Empathy is, so expansive in that way, but it's so manageable in the way that it's understanding that the people that you work with come from all different kinds of cultures, even if they're all from the United States. And maybe the person that's on your leadership team with you was born and raised on a farm in Iowa, and you have no idea what that experience was like for them. And so it's as simple as starting with, "Hey, Tim, did I hear you say that you were from Iowa?" What was that like growing up for you? What was high school like? How do you think it shaped you as a person?
Do you guys really eat as much corn as I think you do?
So much corn. Have you ever been to the Field of Dreams?
Yeah.
Like it starts with just starting to recognize that you can ask questions of people, and that curiosity really is that superpower that leads to understanding. And yeah, you could start with a podcast about education of young women and girls in Afghanistan, or you could ask Tim about growing up in Iowa. It's whatever you think you can manage on that day, and it's the intentional choice that you make.
I know. I think it's fascinating the way that the old story of the person who gets on the airplane and sits down with somebody next to them and does this experiment, and they get off together and they ask that person, hey, that person that sat down next to you, how was that? Oh my gosh, this person was the most fascinating person I've ever met in my entire life. And, oh yeah, really? Well, what do they do? Oh, I don't know. I don't know what they do. Because all they did was ask them questions about themselves the entire flight. And so, of course, they become that old adage of, if you want to be interesting, be interested. And then you were going to get a lot of benefit from that. So talk to us a little bit, Kristen, about the benefits of learning and becoming an empathetic person in business. How do you use this to up-level your business?
Okay, well, let's be honest here, right? We're all in the middle of the great whatever, reshuffle, resignation, whatever. And every piece of data that we're seeing out there is telling us that people are leaving their businesses, leaving their jobs because they weren't respected, or they didn't feel respected, they didn't feel valued, they didn't feel like there was a trajectory for them. It's a lot of feeling words, right? It's not like I mean, some people weren't making enough money for sure, but especially the majority of white collar jobs, it was a lot about emotions. I didn't feel valued. The problem is that for years and years and years, we've all run businesses entirely on KPIs, ROIs, all of the other stuff. And we forgot that the people in front of us are people, and we tend to treat them like interchangeable cogs in a profit machine. My least favorite phrase in business is everyone's replaceable, because it's a lie. There's absolutely nobody in your business who is flat out replaceable, because even if the position is replaceable, you have still lost that person. You have lost their institutional knowledge. You have lost their personality. You have lost how they played with the team dynamic. You have now lost time in having to get somebody else for that position. No one is replaceable. Everybody is a person. And so a big part of empathy is learning the people that work with you, is understanding that the person that's coming in, like, let's say, Seamus in accounting has been a pretty good employee for most of his life, but all of a sudden he's screwing up everything. An empathetic, a kind of business response to that might just be to fire him. Mm-hmm. And an empathetic response would be, hey, Seamus, what's going on? This isn't like you. Mm-hmm. How can we support you in what's ever happening right now? And then you find out that Seamus is getting his house foreclosed on because he made a really bad investment a couple of years ago. And you're like, okay, well, then you're a human. How do we all human together? Mm-hmm. The more that people stay in jobs that they're not particularly challenged by all the time because they like who they work with, or they feel valued as part of the team, or they get through it in different ways. And people are also sent into mental health disorders by jobs that don't respect them and that don't value them. So I've been part of a family business for 32 years now. And I've seen a lot of things. I've been part of lots of different business conversations. We've been in small business conversations for a long time. And what I have learned from both my social science and social work background, and then just listening to my dad and his friends talk for so long, is that the most important part of being a boss is treating the people that you have with respect. And that your job as a leader is to keep them emotionally, physically, and financially safe so that they can do the best job that they have possible. So what does empathy do is it allows you to do that. And you know that Seamus is having this trouble. And so you're not going to write him up. You're going to make sure that that somebody else can support him, or you're going to have a really honest conversation and say, we're going to need to figure out a way for you to not screw up because I don't have anyone else who can double check your numbers right now. Mm-hmm. Like the more it allows you to become more communicative. And then layoffs aren't blindsided. You don't treat people like they are sticks or something. You treat them like they're people.
I know I was thinking about the difference between self-leadership and self-protection. And the way, in self-leadership, you pause, you breathe, you do whatever you got to do, jump around the room for 2 seconds or 3 seconds, so you change your state or whatever, rather than reacting and getting into self-protection because on some level I'm threatened by this situation. And therefore now I'm going to escalate this. I'm going to dive in. I'm going to make it worse. I'm going to do whatever. And clearly, not only does this apply in business, but it applies in our personal lives as well. And so how does the novice empatheticer, and by the way, I love what you said earlier, how do we human together, right? I like that. That's a great expression. How do we human together? How does the novice that is like, this does kind of sound good, and it sure does feel good to me when somebody asks me those questions, but I've really never done much of this, and what do I do? How's that work?
We would really, and we would encourage that person, and we always encourage those people, both to think of it in whatever small, manageable step you feel like you can take. One of the beautiful things that we teach about empathy is understanding the diversity within a person. So it's not just the visible diversities that we categorize as a society. It's not just your race, your gender, your ethnicity, your religion, your level of ability. It's all of those things that maybe you're an avid book reader, or you have a train commute every day, or you like to take 10 minutes in the evening after you put your kids to bed and listen to a book on tape or an audiobook. So when you understand that we all come with this whole host of complexities, you can find little ways that are comfortable to you to start asking those questions. And even to just start, you might not even understand that about yourself. And so, you can't really be empathetic without being self-aware, without building that emotional intelligence as we teach. Because if you're not able to spend time trying to understand yourself, you're not going to have the capability to understand other people's differences. So I would suggest, and we often do, starting with yourself and thinking about, the 10 things that make you who you are. It could be your faith. It could be where you're from. It could be your relationship with your parents. It could be the fact that you are a diehard Philadelphia Phillies baseball fan, like Kristen is. Because when we expand diversity to include all of the things that make people different, we can understand how it shapes their worldview. It might sound...
Please go.
And it's going to say, it might sound silly to think that, being a lifelong baseball fan shapes your worldview as much as maybe your personal faith. But you think about what baseball teaches you and how it teaches you to analyze things and think strategically, and what it teaches you about sportsmanship and camaraderie. Those are all lessons that you then take into yourself as a person in the world, professionally or personally. It can seem like a big thing if you're talking about the really big categories, like race or gender or sexuality. And those are important and they matter. But you can start with the smaller categories, maybe specifically about yourself, and just get to know yourself a bit better. Ask yourself some questions. Be curious about who you are and what makes you who you are, and start on that journey. And then the other thing I would say really quickly is to make sure that you always give yourself grace, that you're a human being and you're going to not feel like being empathetic some days. And that doesn't make you a bad person. That doesn't mean you're bad at empathy. That doesn't mean you should stop. We are human people with emotions, and there are going to be days where you're like, I don't give a flying flip about anybody else today. I'm exhausted. I'm overworked. It's okay. Take a breath. Go do some work in your garden, watch a baseball game, try again tomorrow. If you think about it as something that you just come to every day, trying your best, some days it's not going to go so great. Some days it is. Then it seems less scary, I think.
And if working on yourself feels a little bit overwhelming, because I do know that some people are like, oh, that's even scarier. Like, please don't make me work on myself. I would challenge that the next time your spouse vents to you, don't try to fix it and ask them what they need from you. Start there.
I know in the Buddhist philosophy, they talk about the hardest thing that a human being ever does is to open up the heavy, creaking, groaning door that is your own life and take a hard look inside.
Yep.
And then going to a place of mastering the mind. I find this super interesting, particularly, I think we talked about this earlier, but I have a master's degree in global citizenship from DePaul, an education field. And so much about global citizens, being a global citizen, if you will, is about understanding the other person so that the borders break down. There are no boundaries. The only people creating these boundaries is us. You walk around the planet, it's a pretty natural flowing kind of thing, unless somebody put up a boundary.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about, Kristen, about process. Just so I want people to get some more mass on this so that they can actually do stuff. So asking questions about yourself, asking questions about others, all of those things are great. What other things can people be doing?
I mean, there's some other, you mentioned global citizenship. One of the reasons that we came to this is that we both spent 5 years living in Northern Ireland as Americans. And so something else you can do is travel intentionally. And sometimes that might even mean within your own backyard. In the United States, there is so many different pockets of culture. So the next time you go out to eat, don't go to TGI Fridays. See if there is a cuisine around you that you want to try, and then walk in and say, I have never eaten here before. I don't know anything. This is the taste I kind of like. Feed me. And I will guarantee you they will be delighted to. If you've never gone to live theater before, try it. I mean, so much of this practice is pick a thing and try it.
Yeah.
Pick a thing. What category are you curious about? What element of life is making you itch right now? What don't you quite have a grasp on? Chase it. We have this kind of weird thing in North America, especially as adults, that our lives are kind of written in pen. That this is who I am. I have this career. I have this thing. And then we absolutely admire all of the people that just completely rewrite everything and do something totally new at 40. But we don't really celebrate the people that just kind of understand that it's in pencil and erase tiny things. I used to be this person who always got up on Sunday mornings and read the New York Times and drank fresh squeezed orange juice. But now I'm going to be the person that gets up and goes to a homeless shelter and make sure that everybody has soap for showers. I used to be the person that didn't know anything about Asian cultures. I thought everybody was the same and I didn't understand the problem. And now I'm the person that watched the PBS documentary on Asian Americans, learned that there's a rich history I need to know more about, and gives $10 a month to the National Asian Pacific Women's Forum to make sure that women are being protected from hate crimes. You can do tiny things. One of the quote Erin says all the time, one of her favorite bands, is, I want to make tiny changes upon the earth. And so much of empathy is just the tiny changes. The other thing I would say is, you can choose to not get mad at people who are just living their lives. I know this sounds crazy, but the quickest place that this comes up is the road system of these United States. The person that cut you off in traffic is not, in fact, the spawn of Satan. They are probably just a human person who is either a bad driver, wasn't paying attention, is distracted, is on the way to the hospital, doesn't know what's happening, their foot slipped on the gas, they're driving a rental car that they don't have a ton of control over. These are all equally as valid options as that they chose you to cut off because they hate you. But we tend to respond as though it's this personal affront.
I've been personally attacked by traffic today.
Personally attacked by you cutting me off. So what you could do instead is take a deep breath. You mentioned this already, change your system, take a deep breath, count to 3, and just say, I hope you get where you're going.
Yeah, I remember living in Los Angeles for 20 years,
Oh,
where
Yikes.
Los Angeles, the traffic is so bad. And unless you go to a place like Los Angeles or the 495 Beltway around Washington, D.C., or something like that, people just don't know how bad traffic can be. They just don't get it.
No.
And it was a time where at the beginning of living in Los Angeles, sign language was a very common thing on freeways. And I found myself like, wait a second, that person really doesn't care about my emotions in this moment. They're just doing their thing and living their life. And therefore, if I'm in charge of me and I get upset about this, this is my problem.
Mhm.
And so I flipped it to whenever I got cut off, I would say a little prayer for that person.
yep.
And it was like a remarkably easy thing to do that completely changed the dynamic of me being in charge of me
Yep.
and the ridiculous amount of drivers in Los Angeles that are aggressive, whatever, because of whatever's going on in their life that has absolutely zero to do with me. Zero.
None of your business. It is absolutely none of your business what's going on with them. And we have no idea what it is. And I think, one of the things that we talk about, one of the benefits of empathy, and building a practice of empathy is you are less angry about the state of things because you understand there are things you can and can't control.
Mhm.
And you recognize that it is your emotional state that, I often say to people when we talk about this, I was like, the only person being affected by your road rage is you. They can't hear you. They don't know. They don't care. But you are putting your body into that state of anxiety and frustration and anger, and it is having that repercussion on you. And it's the same for any sort of, element of difference that you'd feel like you don't understand. Well, I have no idea why Mary keeps behaving that way in the break room. You don't, but you're choosing to get upset about it every single time it happens. You could, recognize that that's yours and you really don't care what Mary is doing it, or you can ask her about it and maybe understand a little bit more about her and diffuse that situation in a way that doesn't continue to impact the overall culture of your organization. So it's those changes, it's those calibrations that you can make to choose to care or not, and to choose what you can do about it.
You know what I like about this, I really love about this, is I have a life philosophy kind of approach to how you approach every day, how you go about your day every day. And one of the things that is most important to me is, what is my life condition? What is my life state? Where am I? Am I in a high life state where I'm hopeful and compassionate and even empathetic? Or I am in a low life state where everything looks yucky, including all the people around me and whatever's going on with them. And so part of my daily practice, if you will, is spend some time working on your life state before you go out and interact with everybody else, because then you get to see through the lenses of a high life condition versus the lenses of a low life condition. And I think that there's something to be said about the relationship between that and empathy. It is much easier to listen, to ask questions, to be there for someone, to listen profoundly, and offer that empathy, if you will, if your life condition's in a good place. If you're in a bad space, it's a lot tougher. What do you have to say about that?
Yes, that makes complete sense. Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking, I don't, it's so hard, this life that we're all in. Like, it's so hard. And I think what empathy can really do is teach you what you can and cannot control, as we've already said. And part of what you can control is how you show up in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And by working on that life state, like you just said, which I think is so great, you also learn, like, if you've got a friend that's about to emotionally dump on you, or like they're like, I really need you right now. If you're in a low life state, you're just like, I am not in the best mind space for this. And you can communicate that.
Mm-hmm.
I really want to be here for you, but I can't right now because this other thing is happening. It's not personal, it's reality. And we have a tendency as humans to decide that every decision that is made for us has a moral judgment attached to it. So that person is too busy right now. That must mean there's something wrong with me. Like, no, they're just busy. Like, it's not, they're not choosing something else over you. There is just something else happening. Sometimes they are, and sometimes that's true. But I think more often than not, we make a lot of assumptions about other people's life states that aren't true.
Mhm.
And instead, if we could understand that everybody is doing their best. You may think their best is not good enough. You may think their best is utter garbage. You may think their best is so incredible that you can't even compare, and they give you imposter syndrome. It doesn't matter. They're doing their best, and your job is to do your best, and we're all going to muddle through together.
So what do you say to the thought of, at least as a spiritual leader, I often feel like it's imperative to remind people that they have the power to do their best, because oftentimes I don't think people are doing their best. I think they're doing just whatever they got to do to get by, and that there's much more potential for each of them if they approach life challenges, difficulties, daily whatevers, with a spirit of, let me try to do my best. In other words, intentionally, consciously having that thought process as part of what they're doing.
Yeah. So what I would say to that is that in my perspective, if you're doing the most with what you have in that moment, you're still doing your best in that moment. You can choose to elevate your best. You can choose to expand your best. You can choose to do what you're saying and like live up to potential, but that's not my job to determine for that person what their best is. So I have chosen to show up in every relationship and interaction, giving people the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
In whatever state they're showing up. So yeah, I mean, we have different roles on this planet. And I think as a spiritual leader, it's incredibly important to call people to their next state. But when I say that everyone is doing their best, I do genuinely believe that we are also doing our best and can do better. That those two things can be true at the same time. That who I was 5 years ago was doing her best. And the who I am today with more knowledge and more scars and more history and more everything is still doing her best. And who I'm going to be in 10 years, where I've hopefully grown even more and opened my life up even more to deeper possibilities, is also doing her best. So I think I never want to fall into the toxic positivity or this nonsense that like you have the exact same hours in the day as Beyonce. Like, I want to say, like, everybody is working with what they got right now. Give everyone the benefit of the doubt, and then we can elevate each other together.
And I think that's one of the key facets of our approach to empathy is the intentionality that you mentioned, Ridgely, but also, as much as you can, building in a practice of non-judgment for yourself and for others. And seeking understanding about people helps us understand what they see as their best, and maybe some other situational factors that are happening either internally, mentally within themselves, physically within themselves, emotionally within themselves, or external factors that might be limiting their potential or them reaching the best, what a different best could look like for them. So I think that's, everybody is showing up with what they've got. As we often say when we talk about people, as we're understanding their context, they come by it honestly. Like, a lot of us come by our baggage honestly. And it's just seeking to understand what's packed in those bags. And I think that makes us better able to, in your role, as a spiritual leader, pull people into different roles or callings, or help them elevate themselves, because you've done the work, as you said, to know your internal state when you're showing up in the world, but also to understand their internal state and how they're showing up in the world. And then, that's the thing that we've been saying through this whole conversation, that's going to help you with every relationship that you have. And particularly in business, you don't get anywhere without relationships. You don't do anything without relationships with people, for good or bad. And so these are tools that you can start sharpening, to follow that metaphor through, and then using. as you go along. But it's also, key for us to always return to that non-judgment, that you understand where you're at. I'm a avid yoga practitioner, and one of the great lessons I've gotten from it is like, my body is different every day, and I can't show up on my mat every day and expect the exact same result as yesterday. And I have to listen to myself and to what my state is and what my body is telling me. And it's helped build that self-reflective process. So we can all find things that resonate with us, our particular life philosophy, that help us build those practices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm a big yogi myself. Not as much. My wife's there almost every day. I'm a 3 times a week kind of guy. So I do definitely enjoy that. And you're right. The mat may be the same, but we ain't.
But that's the only thing that's the same.
Right, for sure. Now, I want to ask you both a very interesting question that I ask all of our group growth guests, and that is, what are 3 books that you would recommend? 3 books that you would recommend to people that can be about empathy and the power of empathy in personal life and in business, or about anything else. What would be 3 books that you believe that small business owners, entrepreneurs, coaches, those kinds of people can really benefit from? Who wants to go?
You go first, my dear.
I always have these off the top of my head, and they change with every podcast. So
I know that I suggested you go first because I'm changing my list right now.
So one of mine is Dare to Lead by Brené Brown, which takes a lot of her principles of vulnerability and directly applies them to how do we do that within a business context, which I think is imperative as we move forward. The next one is called Burnout by Emily and Amelia Nagoski. And it talks a lot about the science of constant stress upon the body in ways that we have got to understand better. And the third is called Mountains Beyond Mountains by Tracy Kidder. And it's the story of Dr. Paul Farmer and how he started with a whole bunch of other people, the nonprofit Partners in Health in the Central Plateau of Haiti while he was still in medical school. And what I think is really, really important about that one in particular for business owners and coaches is that every time somebody said to Paul he couldn't do something, his response was, okay, I can't do it that way, but I can do it another way. And he is also was an absolute champion of collaborative thinking, really, really big on indigenous leadership and how can we simply redo resource distribution. If you're working in international contexts at all, it's incredibly important to remember that the people that are the closest to the problem are always the closest to the solution. And so how do we navigate that in terms of resource redistribution? So, and also just creative thinking and all that kind of other stuff. It's one of the more formative books of my life. So those are my 3, and I hope you give them a shot.
Okay, excellent.
All right.
Erin, that's you.
I'm excited. I've made my decision. We call a lot of these books that we're referencing our Abbey Research Bibles. So one of my Abbey Research Bibles that I literally just buy as gifts for people all the time is the book Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez, which from a social scientist perspective is all about how there exists a data bias, a gendered data bias, and how we understand literally everything, from how sidewalks are created and infrastructure is built, when roads are cleared, to the physical, biological study of the different sexes and how drugs work. It's comprehensive. It helps me, it gives me so much context. And when I think about, as you asked me, empathy reads, it's about giving me context to continue to have conversations and to understand things. So this is such a great book for providing that context. And then I see an article 2 years later that comes up that's about how we didn't test COVID tests or COVID vaccinations on women who were menstruating. So we had no idea how the vaccine was going to impact their menstrual cycles because we just didn't ask that question. Mm-hmm. And we learned in hindsight that it actually had a very dramatic reaction on a lot of humans' menstrual cycles. So it gives me that context to continue engaging with difference. The other 2 books I'm going to go with are fiction books because we read a lot of books, as is evidenced by both of our backgrounds. and learn a lot from fiction. And so the one I'm going to recommend is a fairly recent book called There by Tommy Orange, which he's an Indigenous writer. He's Cherokee, I believe, and something else I'm not remembering. But he writes about the urban Indigenous experience, specifically in Oakland, California. And it's such a great, it's a beautifully written book. It's one of those where there's like intersecting stories that all come together at the end. But I think it's so powerful for dispelling the myth that we have in America that Indigenous folks only live in the West on reservations. And whatever we understand those reservations to be, we don't think about the humans around us and the fact that most Indigenous people live in urban environments, and so therefore live and are our neighbors and coworkers and colleagues and people working in the Starbucks. So They're There by Tommy Orange. And then the other one I was thinking about for some reason while we were talking today, I guess when you were talking about mentors and mentorship, that I recommend is John Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath. If you don't know Steinbeck's writing, like read a chunk of it, because some people like him and some people don't. But I still remember the first time that I read Grapes of Wrath and the context it gave me for understanding a huge part of American history that was so much deeper and more personal than what I had learned about the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression in school. Mm-hmm. And it, empathy humanizes people because we categorize difference. We stereotype people because it's easy, because it gives us a shorthand to navigate life. But anything empathetic humanizes people. And so if you like, I'm the historian of the two of us, so I had to pick sort of a historical reference. But Grapes of Wrath changed how I thought about the economy, class, and the way history is taught in this country. And it's a great read on top of it. Like, it doesn't always have to be super heavy lifting. We like to do a lot of light lifting that also teaches us that people are different.
Very nice. So as we're wrapping up today, I'd love for you, each of you, to kind of give us your last sort of thoughts about empathy, the importance of empathy in business and personal life, for humanity as a whole. Just your last sort of thoughts for the Groove community that I believe seeks to espouse many of the principles of listening to each other, supporting each other, understanding each other, non-judgment, all those kinds of things. I think we're all about that. But tell us the last few words. Kristen, I'll start with you. What are you thinking?
I would like everyone to remember that this is constantly a journey, and that nothing is linear. I was thinking, as we were talking about all the people in my personal life who I have a really hard time extending empathy to because their logic just doesn't make sense to me, or their actions are so hurtful that I struggle to see any reasoning behind it. I just react out of my pain. And how there are days I just absolutely don't do any work with that. And I just kind of let it sit and I tap out of being empathetic to that person that day. And in a certain way, because the next day I'm going to get up and maybe feel differently. And as you guys said, in terms of time, the only thing that is certain every day is that it's a new day. Everything else is changeable and movable and weird and wonderful in so many ways. And empathy is a journey and a mindset and a discipline, because humans are complicated little messes of cells and souls. And we need to be able to give ourselves that flexibility to do it. So we've said it a couple times, but you're going to be bad at this. Get really used to apologizing. Practice the phrase, "I'm sorry," in the mirror. You're probably going to need it. Just learn that doing life together is challenging, but every piece of data and every piece of anecdotal evidence I've ever seen is that life is better when we do it together.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Erin, how about you?
Yeah, I think my closing thought is also going to be veering towards the pragmatic. And I was thinking about it, just as you said, practice there, Kristen. And, you asked us several times originally if we could give you examples of of how to practice empathy. And a lot of times we have to give people permission to actually factually practice it. And one of the conversations we have a lot is around the use of pronouns, and especially they, them pronouns for people who use them, who are non-binary, who are gender non-conforming, however they identify themselves or think about themselves. And people are like, oh, I'm so scared to like have this conversation, and like, I'm so scared to mess up, and like, I'm going to hurt somebody's feelings. And, you know, that might happen. You're going to mess up. We have friends that use they, them pronouns. We mess up all the time. So practice it. You know, I was getting ready to have a conversation with a person that we know who uses they, them pronouns. And I sat at my desk and practiced. Mm-hmm. It feels awkward, feels weird. But you know, it's okay to work at these things because it is work. So, you know, get comfortable practicing and get comfortable giving yourself grace. I mean, that's the thing we always say. Like, one of the poems that my family has lived by that I extend to like all my friends is Max Ehrmann's Desiderata. And he says, you know, be gentle with yourself, for you are a child of the universe. Like, just wake up every day and do what you can, and recognize that on the days that you don't feel like it, you don't have the energy, you get really frustrated and you yell at someone in your car. So what? You're human. Try again. If you make it into a really big deal emotionally, it will become a big deal. If you take a breath and say, well, that wasn't my best self, or I don't know why I'm mad at that random person, or I'm going to try again with the next car, you know, it makes it more manageable, and you can do it. It's going to take work, but like, humaning is work. Relationships are work. Going to work is work. We work at all these other things. We can work at empathy too.
I love that. And by the way, if you ever need a different pronoun that applies to everybody, here's a hack from the South. You can just say y'all.
Y'all. I do all the time. It's
you
my,
just say, y'all. So how y'all doing? Y'all doing good? Y'all doing all right? Y'all doing?
Y'all and folks are the ones we use all the time.
Folks is like our go-to. Like, what's with these folks today? Like, yeah. I haven't assigned you anything with that.
Yeah. Well, Erin, Kristen, thank you so very much. And Groovesters, check out the empathy quiz below. Hit the button, go take the empathy quiz, see where you are on the empathy spectrum, learn a little bit about yourself. So for sure, the button's there as usual. Go down there, click on that button, take the Abby Research empathy quiz, learn a little bit about yourself. Erin, Kristen, thank you so very, very much for joining us in our community. Deeply appreciate it. And let's see if we can all make this world a little bit more empathetic. Thank you so much.
Thank
you.